We are ready for the talk. macOS Location Privacy Red Pill. We are gonna have a deep dive into a rabbit hole thanks to Adam. He is an independent security researcher focusing on macOS security, application security, and security architecture. And he is also an active participant in the Apple Security Research Program. As we all might know, location is very sensitive and private information, but attackers are able to bypass Apple's measures to protect privacy. So it is possible to precisely locate users without their consents, due to multiple design flaws, information disclosures, and logic vulnerabilities. And how that happened and how this resulted in 24 CVEs at the Apple Security Advisories, this is gonna be told by Adam today for us. Thank you, Adam, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming to my talk, and apologies for the technical difficulties. I'm super excited to be here today and talk to you about macOS location privacy. So just a few more words about myself. You already heard something. I'm an independent security researcher and freelance security engineer. I've been working in security since around 4 years now. My main focus is macOS security research, application security, and security architecture. And I have a computer engineering background, so I do like to dab with across the stack, essentially. So first, before we dive into the technical stuff, I would like to briefly sort of review why is location privacy important in the first place. Location information, if we zoom into it, and our movement patterns actually carry a lot of information attached to them. They reveal a lot about us. Where do we work and live? Right? Our workplace reveals for who we work for. In some cases, even which professions we have. Where do we live? This sometimes can reveal our salary range. Which cities, organizations, institutions do we visit, right? So this tells something about our culture, our interests, and also which healthcare providers we might visit regularly. How does our weekly routine look like? How long does it work? Where do we drop off our kids? And when are we on vacation and not at home? This information can be interesting if someone sort of was planning to sort of break into your office or even house. This can be quite useful information for an attacker. So what does the current situation of location privacy look like in general, like for our tech industry? The reality is that data brokers sell location data and movement profiles of pretty much everybody, including US military personnel, for as little as 12 cents. And it's really sort of this cat and mouse game where regulators, privacy engineers, and developers kind of struggle to keep up with the pace of the tracking and analytics industry and their tricks they're coming up with. And this is now regarded not only as a general threat for privacy, but also national security by experts. To have a look how this will look like in a few years, we can sort of look at the predictions of the data analytics market as a whole. And here you can see that the average growth is projected to be around 30%. So in 2032, we will probably look at the entire sort of, data analytics market size of $400 billion US. So let's now take some time to jump into the technical foundations of macOS, sort of the ones which are relevant for our security, for our security research. So this is most notably SIP and TCC. So SIP stands for System Integrity Protection. It protects the sensitive part of the operating system and is enforced by the external kernel. The interesting thing about SIP is that not even root privileges will grant you the right to neither read nor write to these directories. And to give you some examples which directories are protected, this is /system, /sbin, /bin, /user, and /applications. But there are more subdirectories protected by SIP. Now we look at the second security mitigation. This is TCC, or Transparent Consent and Control. And here on the right side, you can see a screenshot of the system settings app on the location services prompt. And you can see that sort of every application has a singular sort of turn on and turn off option. And essentially, the TCC database stores all the rules dictating which application can access which data and sensors of the system. So we all seen these pop-ups in iPhone apps or macOS apps asking you for contacts, photos, your microphone, or, like in this case, the location services. Now, it's worth noting that this database on macOS is protected by the security mitigation I was just talking earlier, SIP. So, in other words, TCC as a privacy feature built on top of the security guarantees provided by system integrity protection. All right. I'll also quickly highlight some previous work close to these security mitigations. For once, really great work by Patrick Wardle in 2016 attacking TCC have been done. Then there was a really cool Black Hat talk by Wojciech Regura and Saba Fitzel in 2021 targeting TCC. And there's some phenomenal work by Mikijan in 2022 where he attacked system integrity protection mostly by exploiting bugs in PackageKit. So the main question in my research project were, can we retrieve precise current and historic user location by attacking application and system services that hold special privileges instead of attacking these mitigations themselves, right? So what's the attack surface here? And as we'll see, it's actually quite huge. And the second question really is, so once we found these issues, how can we really like re-engineer, re-architecture these components so they're more robust in the future? All right, let's get into the fun stuff. But before, click a responsibility disclaimer. So all the vulnerabilities that I'm presenting today have been responsibly reported to Apple in the scope of their Apple Security Research and Bug Bounty program. All these bugs have been fixed for longer than 12 months, so if you're patched, you should be good. If not, please patch as soon as possible. And I do also have the explicit permission by Apple to talk about these CVEs today. All right, so now I'd like to jump into the first category of bypasses, which were essentially persistence-based bugs. So when you run a macOS application, you really have two main ways to communicate to the drive. You either use core data, which is an Objective-C framework, which has a long history, or you can use the new Swift data framework, which is built in Swift, but under the hood, it still actually uses quite a lot of components of core data. Now, so in the end, it's all these sort of components lead to talking to an SQLite-free database. Now, in my research, I sort of didn't bother really dealing with neither core data nor Swift data. I was jumping on the database right away. And there's really three ways how we can communicate or write to this database on macOS. So first, we can use the SQLite-free command. This is a command which is shipped just default any macOS system. Then we can use the open source SQLite-free DB browser. This is a tool which I'll talk a bit more in a second. This one is which I use the most when it comes to really finding the bugs. And in some cases, it's also really useful to use a hex editor. So in some instances, there were cases where there were very sort of exotic and weird files within databases, or sometimes there was a really sort of undocumented encoding. So figuring out where's the timestamp, where's the header was really helpful to like, how do I get this parsed later for the exploit? So quick shout out to this tool. I think it's really cool. It's completely free and open source, and it's actually a program which is really popular in the forensics community. So if you want to check that out, here's the GitHub link below. Alrighty, let's jump into the first issue. So the interesting thing, this entire project really was supposed to be like a side quest. I was just curious, how do these widgets work? Like, what did they do and who they talk to. And so when I looked at this weather app, I just clicked on it, and it had access to my location. Like, it's going to ask you, hey, can I use your location? Oh, do we lost signal? Just a second. I didn't touch anything. Adapter. It's always the adapter. Let's try that. It asked me just a second. I think I have to minimize this. Custom.
Look in the front, you can see it.
Da war ein Pop-up nur ganz kurz. Apologies on that. I did practice once on the Beamer, but it didn't prepare for me for this. Anyways, thank you again for the tip. Let's hope it stays this way. So just to go back quickly, so essentially I was clicking on this widget and realized when I clicked on it, it opened the browser. And interestingly, the URL had URL parameters with my precise location in it. So I was thinking, hey, where is this thing? First of all, why is it actually necessary? Why does a weather app need like pinpoint precision of my location? And second, where is this stored, right? Because this thing will not cache this the entire time. So it needs a place to store it somewhere. And so when we look into this, it turns out that this small widget is actually its own process. It's called Apple Weather Widget, and it manages its own database for caching weather data. And when I looked at this with this, I call it deep browser thing, I realized it had a really weird structure. It sort of used my location data as sort of unique ID keys in the DB. So very weird choice. And I did realize there's sort of ways how I can sort of play around with this. So when I turned on, like when I killed the widget, for example, it started to refresh the user location. And what's most notably is that not only this database had my precise location in it, but any app had access to this. So this looked like a problem. And it got even worse, though, because while I was crafting the exploit, I realized there was a second folder /fs cache data, and it was full of files, which were essentially serialized JSON, and they had historic location data of up to 3 months. So this thing was tracking me for like 3 months straight. And so any application could have abused this and sort of like read my movement patterns right away. This was the 5th persistence bypass I sent to Apple, but this was the first one being fixed. Apple agreed this was a bit of an issue, and they fixed it within 6 weeks, which is like light speed for Apple. To be fair, you know, like with system engineering, it takes time. So here's a quick demo. So we see that weather has access to the user location. Terminal doesn't have access to FDA. The macOS version is 12.4, so this is Monterey times. We launched the exploit, and you can see a long list full of user coordinates. And you can see longitude and latitude pairs, but you can also see the timestamp, right? That's crucial. So we can sort of map which geographic coordinate is belonging to which and date. Yeah, so a little of a whoopsie here. And yeah, let's go to the next one. So the next CVE 2023-42957 was an issue in maps. So in this case, I found another interesting cache database which has some coordinate pairs in them. But there wasn't any description of what this is. This didn't look very verbose. It was a mystery at first. And then it turned out when I reverse engineered this, I realized, hey, every time I sort of click somewhere, this cache gets updated. So this looks interesting. So that's the path of this file. It actually has a really weird name. It says location query geocode cache folder. Why is it called folder? It's a file. Why is it query geocode? So naming was a bit funky here. But it was essentially, when I looked into this in Hex editor, it turned out to be an ASCII archive format. Now, what's interesting though, when I looked into it a bit further, so any interaction, so when you use maps, you can sort of click somewhere, right? And then so you interact with this thing, it can be like a state, it can be a restaurant, and then sort of this data will get written there. And after looking into this in the decompiler, the reason why this cache was there is because Apple Maps calculates the drive time to the selected location. So this sounded interesting because if you calculate the drive time, that also means like my location needs to be involved somehow. And I did actually verify afterwards, hey, one of these coordinates, there were like hundreds of coordinates in there, and one of them was actually my location again. And however, this doesn't help us, right? If we just have hundreds of coordinates, how should we as an attacker know which one is the right one, right? We don't know. But when I played around with this, I realized so that, I just messed through this file, I just wrote zeros in there. And there was an interesting effect. When I relaunched maps, there was an exception handler sort of handling this case. And then when I looked this again in the decompiler, there was even a second exception handler, which was handling the case if the database was not there. So very robust software engineering. I was actually surprised to see this, where Apple sort of made sure, even this weird case when the database gets corrupt, this thing just heals itself. Great. On the other hand, this now gives out an interesting exploitation primitive, because we can sort of abuse this for our purpose. Essentially, the strategy here is, first, I delete this database, I restart the app, and there's a small time window now where there's only one coordinate pair in that file, and that is the precise user location. Because of that exception handler work, we can sort of localize which of the coordinates is the right one. So again, quick demo. We can see again the Apple Maps app has permission to location services. Terminal does not have access to FDA, we don't cheat. At the top, I'm not sure if you can read this, the top file is this location query cache folder thing. So, and on the top bottom hand, you can see Apple Maps. So now, I essentially restart Apple Maps, boom, I delete the cache folder. You can see Apple Maps restarted, recreated that file, and we were able to read the precise location of this file. Oh, no. Not again. Demo girls are with us today. Very good. So just a quick overview of like some low-hanging fruit, just to have a feel of what's like the easiest bugs were in this project. Because as I said, like there were a few issues. Some applications simply logged data when you would sort of refresh certain features. So the easiest one, for example, was Apple TV. You just opened Apple TV and boom, like user location gets leaked. That was a bit of a bummer. There was some interesting disclosure in Apple Maps where there were essentially two components at play here. So Apple Maps, or the MapKit thing, uses a component called VectorKit. And that VectorKit component essentially logged the center location of that MapKit thing. Now when you open Maps though, your location is not centered. However, there is a documented deep link which you can use, where I can sort of start a navigation right away. And when I did that, it actually centered my location. So these two things combined, boom, I got the user location leaked in the logs again. And one awesome thing, and this was more like a design issue, was the WeatherKit REST API. And this API design was essentially what I mentioned earlier, that this URL parameters used sort of the geographic coordinates in there. And this was exploitable like 2 or 3 times, and there was sort of one bug where I sort of could just kill the daemon which the app was communicating to, and again, cause an error and leak the location. So just to give an overview of sort of the stuff which was the easiest, I would say, in this project. And if I should be like particularly mean and pick out sort of the, let's say, most unfortunate issue, that was context store D. And so the story here was essentially, I was just writing a report of one of these bugs we just talked about, and I still had terminal open. I'd have a nice ultra-wide screen, and then after 20 minutes, boom, I saw something, like, what's that? And again, by this time, you can imagine, I exactly know the coordinates to my home. And so context store D, boom, your location. How is this happening? I didn't do anything, right? So what's crazy about this issue is after I saw that, I put up the compiler, looked at context store D, and after a few minutes, I realized, hey, this is like a periodic thing. And essentially, this goes for everyone. So as long as you had location services turned on, this thing was essentially logging your location into the logs every 30 minutes by default. So a bit of a whoopsie again. Yeah, not something you expect to see, but mistakes happen. But yeah, so the irony here is that my scanning Z# script was also the exploit itself, like one line command, So that was interesting. But it also means when we know at perspective how we are gonna mitigate this in the future, we need to talk about security unit tests later on. Alrighty, next one. CVE 2023-32415. So this was a network error-based bypass. And as you already know, most applications on macOS and probably on any platform update their data upon starting up. Now, what this also means is that the timing, since on macOS, you can launch any app. And one thing I forgot to mention, I should probably mention this now, you can use the OpenSyscall to launch any app on macOS, and you can also send some arguments into this open command. And you can actually open any app hidden, right? So this exploits you've seen with this map saying this is all sort of invisible to the user if you actually exploit this, like for real. But it also means, hey, we can sort of measure this time, how long it takes from the app startup to when this HTTP request gets sent. Of course, this is not perfect. This depends on so many hardware requirements and like characteristics as well. But you just need like a rough estimate, essentially. And what we then can do, we can interrupt the Wi-Fi connection right after the HTTP request has been sent, but before it has returned. I know it's a bit weird that any app can sort of disrupt Wi-Fi on macOS, but this is how macOS works. Yeah, this worked actually quite nicely. And this caused a network error, which again sort of leaked the location into the logs with a network error sort of message. And so in practice, it's important to know if you report something to Apple, you need a working exploit. So POC exploit needs like 10 rounds to sort of repeat this and disrupt the internet connection. And then we sort of had like a success rate of 95%. This was definitely the most stealthy exploit. Like all the ones were stealthy. This one was maybe not so stealthy, but it worked. So here's a screenshot where you can see, hey, executing 3 cycles of Wi-Fi disruption, blah, 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 restarting weather app. I did this a couple of times, and then you can see there failing URL string key, this weather data REST thing I mentioned, and then the coordinates, of course, a little bit redacted, leaked into the logs. And then we just clean up and restore Wi-Fi connection. All right, Let's now dive into the last category of issues, which weren't about persistence or logic issues or logging info leaks. Well, there's still a leak involved, but this issue is the first one, which involves reconstructing the user location. And we're going to target this precipitation map you can see. So this is sort of this map showing you, hey, when is it going to rain? What's the conditioning look like? How is it going to be in a few hours? It's important to note that this thing is this MapKit framework that is written by Apple. And this is sort of what is used to drive this view. Internally, MapKit uses a transformed coordinate system. So one piece of internal state data was disclosed within the log. So this is how I got interested. And what's worth noting how this works is essentially there's a bijective structure preserving mapping between this MapKit internal coordinate system and our geographic coordinate system. So this is essentially, in mathematical terms, called an isomorphism, right? We can go from one to another. And the idea that I had when I saw the small leak, hey, what if we can reconstruct the full state representation of that MapKit object? And then if we do that, maybe we can reconstruct the precise user location. I wasn't really sure if it's going to work, because if you can maybe see on that screenshot, this is really zoomed out. So, I didn't get my hopes up, but I was like, hey, it's worth a try. Does this work in practice? All right, let's try to craft an exploit for this and see if we can make this work. So first, this exploit was written in Swift. So now we sort of stepped away from shell scripts. And this is how you open another application in Swift. So you have this URL called system application weather app. And then you call the NSWorks shared open application API. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in this open app config, this is where you can sort of place, hey, I want this open to be hidden. I actually don't know why this feature exists apart from exploitation, but it exists. All right, so we're targeting this MapKit thing. And when we restart, so we restart this application, right, with Swift, and then this is where the disclosure happens. So you can see there on the right, we get a maprect, so mkm maprect, and with an mkmap size and an mkmap point. Right, so when I saw this X and Y, I was like, this is interesting. So we used the data, and one thing that I also have to mention, otherwise this entire exploit would have not worked, is that, as you can see, this pin right there, it's perfectly centered, right? This is something which is super characteristics for Apple, right? Beautiful UI, everything is symmetric. And what's interesting here, when I was reverse engineering weather, I realized that this MapKit object, it actually stored the user coordinates with double precision, right? So double precision means 16 digits of precisions. So this is where I sort of go, oh, this is getting interesting. This could work. So I wrote a small subroutine to cut out the substring, right? Nothing special here, y equals to comma, x equals to comma. Just get these 4 values I mentioned earlier out of this log string. The next step is to sort of run this exploit to get this maprect object, right? This is the entire goal of this. So to summarize this idea, this is like a high-level overview of the exploit, but essentially the idea here is that we want to create an UI shadow copy of that application, which is invisible to the system, the victim, but we don't see this left side, right? As an attacker, we don't see anything, but we want to reconstruct it. Then we utilize this just parsed values to create a new maprect object. So we use the width and height to initialize the size. It's really important that this is correct. And then we use the mkmap origin point to sort of span this rect, right? This rectangle. Now then, we can use, after looking in the documentation, which was, I have to say the documentation wasn't the best, but after playing around a little bit, I found this function where I was sort of able to use that maprect with this internal state representation to create another mapkit. This is not usually how the normal developer would do this, but there was this routine. And now we have sort of a working map view. And all which is really left to do is now there's a member variable which we can just call called center coordinate, right? And so now we retrieve an actual geographic coordinate out of this map view, which has this internal sort of, coordinate system. So when I tested this, I took my MacBook on a walk. Actually, this is for every CVE, so this was a very healthy research project. And you can see here that, sorry that I had to redact everything, but this is location privacy for you. So you can see that the exploit outputs the MK map point, the MK map size. It then sort of creates this map, and then calls all these functions, and then we reconstruct a fully working geographic coordinate. And this was actually 1 to 2 meter precise, so full system precision. To summarize this exploit flow for a second, the full exploit is around 200 lines of code. So this was like the high-level overview, but nothing really too difficult. There were some details that I'm sort of missing out on here, but that's fine. It's sort of the main idea. It was 100% reliable and invisible to the user. And it's worth noting that if you would to burn an iOS sandbox escapes for this, you could also have utilized this for iOS. Most people probably wouldn't do this. Oh no. Oh, phew. Okay. There we go. I shouldn't touch anything. Thank you. So most people probably wouldn't burn, iOS sandbox escape for this. But if you could talk to the logs on iOS, this was also exploitable. And this is because the weather app and other applications actually shared code base between these two platforms. So it's not completely the same, but that core part is shared between both platforms. And as I mentioned, max system precision came out of this. Just really quickly, I want to talk about the variant, which I found, which uses the almost same exploitation strategy. So this was CVE 2023-23537. So this is the official Apple security advisory. And the idea here was that you guys probably know this find my item widgets. So this is sort of the right one here on the screen, which display where your AirTags are, right? So your AirTag is probably attached to your wallet, to your backpack. So it also carries that information where you are, right? And what I found is that this widget also disclosed similar MapKit internal state data. We could use almost the same exploitation strategy. There were two things which were different here. So first, it's worth noting that in this case, this was not centered. As you can see, this pin right there, where the location is, it's not perfectly centered. However, compared to the weather app, where, as I said, we needed the center location, right? And the reason why we needed the center location as well is because this view is actually sometimes fluctuating how much it zoomed in. But luckily for us, in this case, this was not the case. So this Find My widget always has the same zoom level. And the second thing we need to account for is that there are actually two sizes of these widgets. So there's a small one and a medium-sized one. And depending which one you get, right, and we don't know as an attacker, this pin is sort of a little bit shifted. So we need to first figure out which one the user has before we can exploit this. But luckily, as always, there was a funny info leak helping me out here. And so, by adjusting this exploit, again, we found another TCC Location Service bypass, which was targeting the victim's AirTags. All right, just a quick water break. This is the last one. I think I'm good in time, actually. 11 minutes? Yeah. All right. So this is the last issue that I found, or the last one we're going to talk about today. So CVE 2023-38-4. There's more. Wait for it. No. And this was actually a very interesting bug because it was an issue which was right in the developer APIs. Oh, sorry. So this exploit, again, tried to reconstruct the user location, and this time with Wi-Fi SSID information. So the CW Wi-Fi Client Developer API, I know, a mouthful, is essentially a wrapper around the entire Wi-Fi subsystem. And it essentially gives you access to these network interfaces. And in this API, there was a class object called CW interface. And it has a method called scan for networks with name. And if you would call that method without any name, so just call it, it would actually output all the SSIDs nearby, including the signal strength. So, and this did not raise TCC permission prompt. Now there's a caveat here, and I'm pretty sure you guys know, that compared to an BSSID or MAC address, an SSID is actually not unique. Right? You can call your Wi-Fi whatever you like. However, in this scenario, this was still an exploitable issue for an attacker. And the reason, as I said, you get 10 to 20 BSIDs. In most cases, I actually almost got 20 Wi-Fi names when I was calling this function. So the likelihood that two fully equal sets with 10 to 20 Wi-Fi access points SSIDs exist in two different geographic locations is just extremely unlikely. So from that perspective, a set of SSIDs is essentially a geographic finger point. You can think of the signal strength as sort of the apartment number of an address, like metaphorically, right? So it will guide us directly to the user location. And I think what I mentioned here that we don't even need to do this ourselves. So because they're actually commercial APIs which allow for SSID sets lookups. It's not hard to do if you have a Wi-Fi database. You can actually download those today. This is like public available. And you just need to, search for candidate sets and then do k-nearest neighbors. And then you sort of need to find out, okay, where's this vector of signal strength fitting, right? And then you can sort of map the SSIDs to BSSIDs. And from there, we're just talking about classic Wi-Fi tree iteration. Just a refresher how this works. So we're not talking about triangulation, right? This is when we have movement involved. This is tree iteration because with our Mac, we usually, we're not on the go, right? We sit at a desk. So this means we need 3 access points at least to exploit this. And so you can see the green arrow A is so for access point A, then B is for the B, and the red radius is for the third access point. And the signal strength is essentially inversely proportional to that radius. And so in there's a space where all these 3 circles overlap, and this is the localized user position. So again, crafted an exploit, wrote a report to Apple, and a few things I want to mention here. You can see that there's an SSID here, the RSSI, so the signal strength, and we also got channel information. And it's worth noting, channels is also interesting because Wi-Fi channels are regional, depends on where you live. And we even got information about the security level, which is also interesting. And so these access points were refreshing with every call. So this allowed for real-time tracking of the user. And one more thing I want to mention, this exploit actually worked even if you had location services turned on. So when you're like, oh, I'm paranoid, I'm not going to use this, like, haha, joke's on you, it still works. And this entire exploit worked even from the macOS App Store sandbox. All right, to summarize this. So in total, I found 24 issues. On this slide, there are only 23 because Apple sort of delayed a CVE entry, so I couldn't add it here this time, but it doesn't matter. The CVE number exists, but anyways. So essentially 80% of the issues were located in 5 components. And if you look at these components, weather, maps, Find My TV, networking, sort of not too surprising. Essentially, the code which uses user location most always had the most bugs. But also, it's worth noting that there were issues in settings. This was for the time zone thing, right? It's also location-based. There was an issue in calendar. This essentially was a problem where I was able to exploit the calculation to the destination, right? Of the events in your calendar. Then I have a Wi-Fi bug. Destination D, it's in the name. It's about routing, not too surprising. And boot P. As I mentioned, one CV is missing, but I will update this once this is done. So let's step back for a second and ask ourselves the question, why did this go so wrong, right? When you find so many issues, we really have to ask the questions, what's the root cause here? And one thing I want to say is what I've learned through this project, that location privacy engineering is actually really hard. Your user location can materialize in so many different ways, right? We saw geographic location data, we saw Wi-Fi information, SSIDs, BSSIDs, house addresses. We didn't even talk about Bluetooth today. There's so many ways how you can sort of get the user location if you put in a little bit of work. One thing that was really problematic, I think 40% of the exploit utilized an info leak in the logs. And I think it's a bit problematic that every process on macOS can access these logs. One thing that I think some developers are not aware of is that there are 5 different states of logs streams. And most of these issues were in the lowest one. It's called the debug log. And I think some people think when you log something on debug, it actually doesn't ship when you release the app, but that's not the case. Every log level gets executed, even when it's at the App Store or at the user side. Something to keep in mind if you're a developer. I definitely think that when you try to sort of get all these issues fixed, it's important to sort of use automatic integration testing in your developer pipelines, right? I do think the coverage at Apple's side was not enough here. It's also worth noting that TCC is not that old, and a lot of these components, for example, location D, have a long history. So a lot of these code bases were actually not designed with like privacy features or TCC and in mind. So getting this right after the fact is a bit tricky, of course. Let's talk about mitigation and defenses. So for one, I want to mention that Apple actually did adjust one thing about TCC, which is really good. Now, every app data container is protected by TCC, right? So these first issues that I've shown with maps and weather, where the database was sort of just accessible to anyone, this is now sort of protected, right? You will see a prompt, hey, can this app access this data, like this app's data? But this was sort of the only thing that also, big picture-wise, which Apple changed, and I think there's still work left to do. So my suggestions what Apple could sort of look into if this is a feasible change is that we really need to shift the responsibility from developers to the framework level. Like, it cannot be that sort of this entire privacy feature relies on the fact that no developer never makes a mistake, right? This doesn't scale, especially not in a systems engineering context. So one thing we could do, we could, for example, redesign the developer APIs, especially the one like CL location coordinate 2D, to make sure that these objects sort of like redact themselves automatically. Another issue I've seen quite a bit was that sometimes we have a lot of nested objects. So imagine you have like big object, and this object has a sub-object, which has another sub-object. And you don't always see that there's location data in this object when you use this as a developer. So this can be quite tricky on the developer side. And I think what would be helpful here if Apple would sort of like introduce something called like privacy-sensitive protocols. So for those of you who don't know Swift, protocols essentially are like interfaces on steroids, and they're designed from like an architecture perspective to describe the behavior of an object. And so this would allow Apple to sort of like enforce this during compile time. They could have a logger, which sort of like, it logs an object. If it's a normal object, just, business as usual. But if it's a, object with this privacy-sensitive protocol attached to it, it would decide, hey, we actually need to log this differently, right? So we'd use a different method to make sure all sensitive data recursively would sort of be redacted automatically, right? And as I said, an increase in privacy unit test integration testing is always a good idea to find issues like this before they hit the user's hands. I quickly want to talk about my impressions on the Apple Security Bounty Program. And in general, I have to say that I had a positive experience, and it was in generally a very friendly exchange. What I especially want to highlight that Apple has fixed every single sort of issue I sent to them. So I sent them a couple of reports, and I never sort of run that issue, which we all know, that vendor tries to downplay the impact. So I didn't have to face this issue, which actually, whoops, sorry. So this was something that, to me, that's important. We all see these reports where vendors, like, oh, we're not going to fix this, or it's not so bad. So I didn't experience this, which was pretty cool. When you have questions, though, I have to say, this is pretty widely known. The answer to questions sometimes can be a bit sparse, right? So Apple's a bit secretive. I also experienced this, but all in all, I didn't really had a lot of issues. But I want to do mention that sometimes, a little bit of a longer answer would have been nice. Over 90% of the CVE have been rewarded with a generous bounty. And one cool thing they do, and I think it's pretty nice, is that if you decide to donate your bounty, they actually double the amount. So it's pretty cool. So I was able to sort of donate $41,000 with this 2x factor, and I think it's pretty nice that Thank you. I want to mention this because I think Apple really is a good sport here. All right. So I want to thank a couple of people. So first of all, I really need to thank the macOS Security Research Committee as a whole, especially people like Patrick Wardle, Csaba Fitzel, Wojciech Reguła, Mickey Jin, and Gogol Kalman. I just was really lucky to meet all of these guys in person finally. And these are all people who share the knowledge in blog posts and talks and even books. And without them, a lot of this work would have not happened. So huge thanks to these guys. I also would like to thank to Apple because as much as I like breaking things and talk to you about it on stage, the truth is the hard work really is like fixing this. In some cases, Apple had to re-engineer entire cache mechanisms, persistence mechanisms. So under the hood, this caused quite a bit of work, which is nice to see. And so yeah, thanks to all people who write software, are privacy engineers or security engineers at Apple. And I also would like to thank everyone at 38C3, all the volunteers and organizers. This is my first Congress, and when I arrived here yesterday, I was like, wow, this is nuts. Everything is so planned out, so much love for detail, and I have a blast. So thank you all, and you guys are awesome.
So, thank you very much for your amazing talks and all the wonderful insights. We are having the possibility to have some questions. We have some microphones here in the room. You can line up there, and we might also have some questions from the internet from the Signal Angel, but I already see someone at microphone 3.
You talked earlier about discovering a vulnerability in the context store D service, I guess. Could you further elaborate what that service does primarily when it's not leaking user data?
Yeah, good question. I did briefly look into this, and it seems like a daemon which sort of looks where you are, and depending on where you are, certain things will change. For example, on the TV app, so different content will be displayed and stuff like that. So it has something to do along these lines.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. Microphone 1, please.
Yes, thanks a lot for the talk. You mentioned the App Store sandbox. Could you explain what that is?
Sure. So that was actually a bit of an imprecise way. So on macOS, if you download any app from the internet, most of them are non-sandbox. This is sort of the default threat model on macOS. However, if you are downloading something from the App Store, the sandbox is actually mandatory, right? So from an exploitation perspective, it's not important because, the macOS App Store never really took off as far as I know. But I did want to mention that this Wi-Fi thing was callable even for applications from the macOS App Store. Yeah.
All right, then other question at microphone 2.
Hi. Did you look at how Apple addressed the function call with the where you could just pass no name for the SSID lookup? What did they do to it?
I did look. This is a bit of a while ago. I think they just removed the entire thing. To be honest, it's not usable anymore. I definitely, for every of these exploits, I did check that my exploit didn't work after they said it's fixed, and I think we just removed this functionality entirely.
Thanks.
Okay, microphone 4.
Yes, hi. I have a question regarding the map exploit, which you explained in detail. So you have told us that the data structure is isomorphic to the real coordinate system in double precision. And you already have like the window width and the pointer precision. So I have the question, why is it important to make a shadow copy of the program?
So essentially, you cannot sort of place a map view without anything. You need to first create a UI window. So that UI window size actually doesn't matter, but you need to create an app, right? So this is relevant for exploitation because we need to make sure we can hide this, and it is possible. And so the second part of this is that we were not able to sort of use that MK map point and just sort of translate it because it was sort of the origin of that rectangle, right? And we don't know how much zoomed in that map is. So we need to create a UI window, then this map view, initialize it with this map rect, and only then, because this is centered, we're able to extract the central location.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, then microphone 3 again.
I think when collecting location data between multiple users, they try to apply differential privacy on top of it, which kind of blurs the location data between the users. Do you think about blurring the location data on the same machine as part of the API to make it like less precise where exactly you are?
Absolutely. I had like similar thoughts with a share to Apple, for example, for the weather app. Like, why does this even need this precision? I don't think it needs, because weather predictions don't even have that precision that this is relevant. So yeah, absolutely, you could utilize this. You could also think about having something like a service at Apple, which sort of encrypts certain logs, and then sort of this encryption key would be sort of only possible to retrieve once you once you can read application's memory. But at this point, system integrity protection is already defeated. So this would be sort of a feasible way as well. But you can also hash them. And actually hashing location coordinates is actually supported by default by this API as well. So yeah, definitely a lot of ways how you can sort of attack this and mitigate this. Good question.
All right, thank you. Microphone 1.
Yes, you mentioned that you can get the SSID, but also the received signal strength indication.
Yeah.
Do you have any pointers that Apple actually below that interface has some indication of even better precision? For example, using carrier tracking of specific packets, or MIMO-based, or if you have a very wideband packet, you might be able to actually getting more precise position relative to this access point.
So you mean if, I'm not sure if I understood that question right. Do you mean if there were a way to get even more precise?
Yes.
Sort of?
Yeah.
So there was, in my, as far as I know, there was no additional information for for example, package dropping, right? That would be interesting because then we would able to realize, hey, is this access point behind a wall?
Yeah.
And then signal strength is sort of, less of a good indicator. But I think in that case, because you had so many data points, you could sort of just don't care about it. And if you see an outlier, oh, this is wrong. This must be behind a wall because it doesn't fit to all of these access points. So I think this is why this exploit actually didn't need that. But a great question. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Since there are a lot of interested viewers on the screens at home, we also have a question from the internet and our Signal Angel.
Yes, you mentioned that you checked whether the empty SSID lookup exploit still worked. DNet wants to know, in general, for all the exploits, whether you checked yourself or whether you kind of relied on Apple to say whether it's fixed.
So for every bug, even if Apple doesn't ask me, I always check if the exploit doesn't work anymore. And there were cases where they said it's fixed and it wasn't. And there were also cases where it says it's fixed, but was able to bypass the fix. So I think this is important in general, like if you work a vendor. And I don't want to even say this, how could you do? Because you have to keep in mind with systems engineering, right? If you develop, like Macs through the entire stack, there's so many branches you have to merge this fix into, and fix can go wrong here. So it's always important to check the fix, definitely. Yeah.
All right, then from room glitch here, microphone number 2.
The macOS, the MacBook and the TV don't have chips for GPS. So how can Apple get a precise location? Is this information shared from other Apple devices? I mean, how can they get very, very precise so that you have to blur the coordinates?
Great question. So I looked into location quite a bit and reverse engineered a little bit. And this is actually an extremely complex piece of software. So for one, they do Wi-Fi tritellation, right? So the slide I shown earlier where they use multiple sort of Wi-Fi points to tritellate the user, and you can get 2 to 4 meters precise. However, there's also a functionality under the hood where if you have an iPhone, an Apple Watch, and they recently sort of got the GPS data, there's sort of a function in location D to donate this location data to the Mac. And so there's a lot of things going on in the background why, whenever I verified, this was very precise location data.
Can this be turned off?
So make it less precise. Unfortunately, you don't have this option like on iOS where you can say, hey, an app wants your location, but only give the less precise location. This is actually a good suggestion. I think Apple should look into this to sort of give the user, the possibility to just share the rough location. Yeah, good point.
All right, thank you. Then microphone number 1.
So I'm still interested in the sandbox thing.
Sure.
Apart from the SSID thing, what impact does the sandbox have on user privacy and also in your context?
Good point. So one thing I definitely want to mention, on iOS, the security guarantees are definitely stronger. This is because the iOS sandbox is actually definitely a hoop to get around. I wouldn't say that the macOS sandbox is as hard to get around. We've seen a lot of exploits recently, actually, great research by mitigations, for example, if you're interested. And yeah, just a desktop operating system, right? It's a tinkering machine. It's meant to have all this funky functionality. So I don't consider the macOS sandbox to be sort of like a big obstacle. But it's worth noting that, again, when you download an application from the internet, most of them don't sandbox themselves. So this is sort of the relevant threat model here. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your questions and also for your answers and the amazing talk. Again, a warm applause for Adam.